Everyone, welcome back to the workshop. Today we are looking at the Jiccoda L1 laser. This is a 10 watt diode laser that's available on Amazon, and I've been working with it for the past few weeks. I'm going to go through some of the projects and tests I've done with it, share with you how it performed, and we'll wrap it up at the end. So if you're interested in this laser, stay tuned. We'll jump right into it. As I mentioned, this is the L1 laser from Jiccoda. It is a 10 watt diode laser, and they did provide this to us to do this review. I did ask them to also include their air assist option with this, as you can get it both with and without. And anytime you're looking at a 10 watt diode laser, I really recommend having the air assist if you're going to be doing any sort of cutting at all. So they did include that as well. I'm not going to be going over the build in this video. I did a live stream where I put the laser together on that video and that live stream. So if you're interested in the build, I do have a link to that on my channel. I'll have it down below, and you can see the build in real time as we did that a few weeks ago. But I will be covering just a few of my pros and cons about the build and the structure and the features of the laser before we jump into my test results. All right, so as far as the build goes of this machine, it was fairly straightforward. They do provide a decent manual that does have all of the steps involved, and they are fairly well descriptive, but they are some kind of small directions on there. So there were a couple times where I was just questioning which screw to use, and but they do provide the hardware packs individually, labeled by steps, so it wasn't too difficult. I do appreciate that it is an all metal frame and that the parts fit together pretty well. I did have a couple of issues just kind of making sure the alignment was right, but once you got everything lined up, then the screws did fit in without any stripping, without any force, and that worked pretty well. One of my concerns, it's both a feature and a concern, is those belts are well hidden inside the extrusions, the custom extrusions. So they're less likely to get smoke and debris on them, but when you do have an issue with them, they're going to be just a little bit harder to service, as you're going to have to probably take the frame apart to get the belt loop back over that. And so there's just a little bit, if you get to that point where you're replacing belts, it's going to be a little more of a disassembly. I really do like the cable management they provide. Primarily, they have the control cables coiled, so they tend to stay out of the way more. And then they do provide clips along the bottom and along the top where it holds the wiring in place. I simply ran the air assist tubing through that coil and then gently zip tied them to the top to add the extra cable management for that as well. I do like that they include limit switches, although you did have to install them manually, and that was one of the areas where it took a little bit of time, just making sure that the right wires were getting plugged into the right spots on those boards. It would have been nice if there was some clearer markings on each of the plugs, and maybe if they had been a little more pre-installed, just one less step for the end user to mess up. The laser head itself is held on through your typical dovetail sliding assembly, and then the knob on the side allows you to loosen that, and then you can adjust your focus from there. It's not terrible, it holds it well. My one concern is that over time that screw going into the dovetail may bite into it and make that a little bit rough. It does have your typical roller wheels, and they are like a plastic Delrin style. So they will wear down over time. They're a little smaller than your typical 3D printer ones. So that may be a wear issue over time, that you have to do a little more digging to get the right size wheels. But then they do have, on both axes, they have an eccentric nut. You do kind of have to get in there, but you can adjust that to tighten and loosen the wheels so that they're moving smoothly. Now, as you can see here, I have the air assist installed. This doesn't come with the base laser. And I really do feel that having an air assist on one of these is critically important when cutting, but it's also good to have positive airflow even when engraving to help keep your lens clean. Now, the issue with this one is that they provide the kit with both this cone as well as an offset option to have it clamp onto the outside of the module, except for that clamp one doesn't fit onto this module. This plastic shroud could come off, revealing the inner module that it might fit on, but then you lose a couple things. By default, it has this plastic shroud on it, and then it has this nice little kickstand kind of thing to lower it down to set your focus. However, the way this is designed is that it's trying to funnel your air coming from the fan and down onto the engraving area and out the back. Well, all this gets in the way of having this cone on, and this plastic shroud also gets in the way of using the other one. So either way, you have to make some choices when you're installing the air assist. Now, I put the cone on because the other one would require this shroud to come off, and then it leaves more of the electronics exposed and some issues there. But then my options were to go without this shroud. But then two things. You lose the safety of the acrylic that's going to block some of the laser light. And you also lose your focus tool that's built into this. So I went that route, but that meant I had to figure out how am I going to replace that focus tool. And they don't provide any direction in that, at least not that I could see. What I ended up doing was I took the measurement with the shroud on, focused on the base material, and found out that it was about 37 millimeters from this front lip of this plastic to the material. I then put the cone on, and then took a new measurement, and then measured the distance from the base of the cone to the top of the material. That ended up being about 2.5 millimeters. So then I found a piece of acrylic sheet that's about that thickness, and I used that as a focus tool. Now, it would be nice if they had an option to use the air assist that didn't require you to disable your focus tool or have to cut into this and hack your acrylic up. Now, one thing that I do really like is the fact that they have all of your cables, your power port, they have a roller adapter. All this is on the front panel here, but it's facing forward. It's not stuck up here on the top. It's not hanging off the edge. It's out of the way, but accessible. It really bugs me when you have these cables coming up off the top, and they're getting in the way of you accessing your machine. So when you plug in things in here, they really do kind of stay out of the way, and they're all right here, easily accessible. Now, this does use for connecting to the computer, uses a USB-C, which again, it's kind of nice. It's a modern connector. We have them all on most of our phones, as opposed to the USB-A, which, yeah, it's the old style USB printer, but those are going the way of the dodo bird. You just don't see them as much anymore. I'd much rather have a cable that I'm used to using with other devices. So props on them for that. I also love that they include this emergency stop button. It's big, it's easy to get at, there's no cables in the way, and it works. So props on them for that. They included it as a safety feature. It's not in the way with other cables around it. What you have next to it is also a warning indicator. And if there's any of the alarms that go off, that will flash and it'll beep. So this does have a couple additional safety features besides the acrylic shroud, which we've already taken off. And by the way, if you do that, make sure you wear your laser safety glasses. Very important. The other safety features are that it has a tilt sensor. So when you tilt the machine up, whether it's falling or by accident, once it reaches a certain time and a certain degree, it's going to shut off the motion. It's going to shut off the laser. Your machine will start flashing a little bit, and you'll get a little warning. And then also, if you rotate this around, you'll notice up front here, this little spot here is actually a flame detection sensor. So what that's there for is that if it starts seeing too much flame, instead of just the light from the laser, it's going to, again, shut off the motion, shut off the laser. That can help avert a catastrophe. Now, the one thing I haven't checked into is the sensitivity of it. I did some playing around to see, does it trigger and when and where? And it wasn't right away. It did take flame for a little bit, which is good because your laser will occasionally flare up. You don't want false positives, but you do want it to recognize there's more than a normal amount of flame. I need to shut things down. So that will hopefully help a problem from getting worse and or help you address it. Again, I already talked about part of this, but as I mentioned, we got the optional air assist with it. And that comes with those options for the cone, but it also comes with a variable speed air pump. I've always had kind of mixed results on them, but this one has performed pretty well. It's always a balance between, is it creating enough airflow, and also how much noise and whatnot does it make. So I don't have a really good way to test the airflow, but we tested the results. But one thing I was happy with is that it does seem to work pretty well, and I'll see if you can hear this. So it's got a very low setting, and that's good for just having a little bit of positive pressure through the air cone to keep smoke from going back up in there and messing with your lens. And then you can turn it up full. It's by no means loud. It does vibrate a little bit, and as you can maybe see, it's kind of walking a little bit. So you might want to, anchor this down, but it provides a steady stream of air. That's what you need for that. Now, anytime I am testing out a new laser, I tend to use a known material that is pretty common to things I will work with it. And in this case, it's 1/8" plywood. Now, I have a couple different grades of that. I have what's considered kind of a light ply or a craft plywood. And then I have a lot of scraps and full sheets of 1/8" or 3mm Baltic birch plywood. And so here is the first one we ran, and this is without air assist on. And so as you can see, we're going from about 150 to all the way up to 350 millimeters a minute, and then from about 40 to 100% power. And you can kind of see we have a bit of a graduated scale there as the power goes, or as the speed goes up, that you need more and more power to cut through it. But what I'm seeing here is that it really tops out at 325 millimeters a minute at 100% power. But even there, I'll probably back that off just a little bit, because anytime you have a slight void or imperfection, that can cause a gap in your cut. So really, realistically, without air, this one's running at 300 millimeters a minute, 90 to 100% power, getting pretty clean cuts on this material. And that's actually pretty good for a 10-watt diode laser such as this. So then we went ahead and tested it with the air on. And excuse the engraving. Anytime you run the air on with engraving, you do kind of get a little bit of a smudging there. But we got a slight improvement in the quality of the cut, where it got up to 350 millimeters a minute at 100% power. So this might be where with the air on, you could run it at 325. But where you really notice the difference with the air is that the quality of the cuts front and back are actually cleaner. And so moving forward with that, we also wanted to do an engraving. And so this is a graduated scale all the way from 1,000 up to 9,000 millimeters a minute, which is the advertised top speed, or actually in the Gerbil settings, I went and checked, that's the top speed of the machine. And then from 10 to 100% power. And at 1,000 millimeters a minute and 100% power, you can see we actually blasted through the material. So there's just another reason you want to be mindful of this. But using this scale, we got fairly clean, consistent results in the 4,000 to 6,000 millimeters a minute range, all the way from 10 to 100% power. And so with that, knowing where our gradient is the best without overburning, giving this the most colorish from the darkest to the lightest, that's where we can start setting up some files. So after testing the 1/8" material, moved up to some 1/4" material. Now this is a piece of solid, just red Western cedar, and wanted to test the cutting. And this was without the air assist at first. We were kind of struggling to get through. Even this is 250 millimeters a minute, 2 passes. Even at 400 millimeters a minute at 4 passes, I was just struggling to get that bottom part through. But then we added the air assist, and at 400 millimeters a minute and 2 passes, I was getting a clean cut all the way through. So there just shows you the difference that air assist can make. It can go from not quite cutting all the way through to getting some clean cuts. And we now know that this machine, on certain hardwoods and softwoods, we can get through 1/4" or 6mm material. So with that in mind, I went ahead and started playing around with some designs. Now it is February, month of Valentine's and such, so why not cut out some hearts? And so I took some 1/4" poplar and was able to do a test cut where we cut out, the outer shape, and then I actually then took the inside shape and just added a nice little engraving on the inside, just to, again, both test the cutting and the engraving. Got a fairly even engrave there. Get it to not focus on me, but on there. So fairly clean, a little bit dark on the top side, but then if you can see the edge of the cut, it's fairly clean. It's got some caramelization, but not a lot of charring. So that's kind of things we're looking for, is that we're actually getting a clean cut and not just blasting through and leaving a lot of char. So again, with certain hardwoods and softwoods, 1/4" material is definitely going to be possible with this. Like I said, my settings were around 400 millimeters a minute, 2 to 3 passes. You could go slower, but that's where you're going to start getting more of that charring effect instead of clean cuts. So if you're getting that, try increasing your speed and increasing your passes. That means the laser is going to linger less in one spot, and you're going to have less chance for it to char up. So knowing that we had our settings for cutting, I also wanted to look at some engraving options. And so this is another test grid where it tests various image modes and at various powers. And so using this, you can start to dial in what looks best with this laser. And some of the more popular ones there are going to be your Atkinson, your Newsprint, your Dither, and your Jarvis. And then here is your maximum power across the bottom. So you can kind of take a comparison there to see what looks good. And in my case, I was finding 90 to 80% on Dither or Jarvis are really where this one was shining really well. So with that in mind, I went ahead and scaled up to this, which is an AI rendering of a baby Sonic the Hedgehog. And I probably went a little slow. This was 5,000 millimeters a minute and 90% power. I probably should have backed this off to maybe 80%, and I actually bumped it up to 6,000 millimeters a minute, but it still came out pretty well. There's a fair amount of detail from that image. And if you even can notice, there's some depth to that where, again, that was probably a little too hot on there. So it's getting more depth than I want, but definitely something doable with these diode lasers, and this one performs pretty well. This job between the engraving and the cutout, and this is about a 4-inch square, took about 30 minutes. This is a sample piece of acrylic. It's about an 1/8 inch thick, and it is black, and it is solid. So it's not translucent. It is solid all the way through. And I was able to cut out this circle in here at about 150 millimeters a minute, one pass, 100% power. And then if you can tell, it's also engraved with a W there that actually goes down into it. It's fairly clean. And that was at 2,000 millimeters a minute, about 85% power. Now, if this was clear, the laser wouldn't do anything to it. You can engrave the surface of it, but you would have to add something like tempera paint or another binder on top of it for the laser to interact with. Otherwise, when you get into those clear or translucent colors or the lighter ones, it just doesn't have the ability. It's a physics thing that the light beam is just going to go through that. It's not going to interact with it. So if you have darker colors like black, grays, browns, they're going to work okay. But when you get into the lighter colors, it's going to struggle and not necessarily be able to clean a cut or be able to engrave it as well. So other mediums though is that I enjoy using is slate tile. So this is unfinished in any way. It's just straight onto the slate tile. This is a vector image. So it's all just a one, there's not raster, it's not changing power. It's the same power and such. And so it very clean, crisp lines on there, very clear contrast. Now you could finish this off with some polyurethane or such and you get some glossier, you might get a whiter look to it, a little more contrast, but I just prefer the natural look more myself. So slate tiles with these diode lasers definitely get some really clean, crisp, fine details. You look into those claws and whatnot, they are very finely done. And so great thing to be playing around with slate tiles and the diode laser, and this one performed admirably. So whenever I'm testing a laser, I like to do a real world project with it to just really kind of get a better feel for how it's going to perform. And so in this case, I created this kind of airplane wall art. It's backlit with LED lights. They're stood off from the surface of this. And right now I'm just powering it with a battery. And so this is just kind of a cool little project. I used some backlit LEDs, used some diffusing in there to kind of offset the light and just make it shine more than just being glaring at you. And I did a whole video on this. I will link it down below as well if you want to check this out. But the laser performed well. This is all 8-inch Baltic birch plywood, and then also some tracing paper that I also cut out with the laser, and then just offset with some dowels that I glued in place, and then some 12-volt LED lights with it. But so that is going to wrap it up for this video. I hope these tests gave you some idea about the capabilities of this laser and gave you a better idea of whether it might fit for you. I will have links down below to this laser. At the time of this recording, the laser was selling for about $499 with or without some coupons. And then the Air Assist is about another $90, although they may have some package deals as well. Other things you might want to consider with this laser definitely would be a honeycomb bed. Jiccoda does sell those as well. We may be looking at that in the future. Otherwise, there's a number of manufacturers there as well. I have some options down below, as well as an enclosure. Anytime you're using these lasers, they do create a lot of smoke and debris. You definitely want to contain that if you're working in an indoor environment and then vent that outside. Then again, it does come with some laser glasses. They're okay. I always recommend getting some that are properly rated for the laser. I use a pair myself that are from Free Mascot that also fit over these well. I do have a slightly larger head, and so these fit on my head well and over my prescription glasses. So I'll leave a link to these below as well if you're interested in that. All these links will be affiliate links. They do go to support the channel. They do give me a little bit of a commission based off your purchase at no extra cost to you, but no pressure. I don't want you to feel like you have to use those. It's just if you did find some value here and can use those, they do help me out a bit as well. So that's going to wrap it up for us. I hope you found this informative. I hope it maybe helped you on your decision if you're looking at this laser or one similar to it. And if you do have any questions or comments, go ahead and leave that down below. If you found this helpful, hit that like button. And if you'd like to see what else I'm doing in the workshop and want to check out some of my other videos on tips and tricks and project ideas in the workshop and a lot with lasers, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. I definitely would appreciate it. So I will wrap it up with that. It was great having you all here, and I hope you can get out into your workshop and make something too. We'll catch you next time.